All right, mi familia. We have our spindrift and we're going to dive in. I'm releasing this particular Bible study on September the 1st of 2022. So I don't know when anybody's watching this, but this concept, or this Bible study, I should say, it's not a concept, it's actually a real thing, but we're talking about worry. And the reason why is, I think, because the season that we're in, or the season that many people are in, when you're expanding, when you're moving in new directions, when you are ready to experience life different, right? Being called into the new can sometimes be very jarring for men. Make sure I'm recording, because I was like, am I recording this? I am. So sometimes when you're being called into the new, it can be very jarring for people. There's a lot of change that has to take place. And usually if you're wanting to expand quickly, that change has to happen quickly. But we're talking about worry. So I am in Matthew chapter 6. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount. And I use worry, I use doubt interchangeably because we experience them in tandem. Like, it's not like one day you're doubting and one day it's worry. It's both the same thing in terms of the effects of them. So I'm going to use them interchangeably here. It's worry and doubt really, they really are one of the greatest threats to your expansion. And I'm not just talking about money. Money is absolutely included, but I'm talking about your expansion for everything in life, the relationships that you have, the jobs that you take, the ability to make more money, the houses that you buy, whatever the case is. Like, worry and doubt really can affect your expansion. And I just want to expand on that a little bit today, because it's so important to understand how dangerous worry truly is, because worry replaces the position that faith is supposed to have. And I'll repeat that again. Worry replaces the position in your life, in your body, in your being. Worry replaces the position that faith is supposed to have. In faith, right, you can envision the most amazing life. In faith, you can believe that God is going to do something amazing. In faith, you can dive into the possibilities, the endless possibilities that the creator of the universe can present before you. But watch this. In worry, you'll envision the worst case scenario. In worry, you will envision none of that happening and the opposite of the good things happening, right? And I need you to understand that you can't exist in those two spaces at one time. It's either one or the other. And we know whichever one the dominant one is, that's the one that's going to dictate your reality, right? Like, we know that those thoughts, those feelings, that is creating frequency, and the dominant frequency is what we create in our three-dimensional reality. I like to think of worry as like the great colonizer. Worry colonizes. It colonizes your mind, right? You know that scene in Black Panther where the sister goes, "Oh, colonizer, you scared me," right? Or something like that. "Oh, colonizer scared me." That's kind of how I think about worry when it pops up in my mind. I'm like, "Oh, colonizer, colonizer." Just start yelling colonizer to all my worries and all my doubts and things like that, because that's what colonizers do, right? Like, colonizers, they pop in out of nowhere. It's like, where the heck did that even come from? Why did I even have that thought? And then what else do colonizers do? Like, and I'm not saying this I'm not talking about necessarily race or whatever. I'm simply talking about the concept of colonization. Okay, let's not necessarily get political right here. I'm talking about the concept of colonization. I don't think any of us have to doubt or have to be demure about the history of humanity and what the effects of colonization has done to many different cultures, because colonizing or colonizers, they will strip down the very identity of a culture and they will make it something else. Right? That's what worry does. It strips you down of your identity as a child of God. It strips you down of your cultural inheritance that is your birthright, and it gives you something else that pales in comparison to whatever you were supposed to be. That's why I look at worry as like the great colonizer, right? So think about that as we go through this passage. I'm coming from Matthew, if I can find it. Matthew chapter 6. Let me see here. Matthew chapter 6, again, CSB version here. God, again, I highly recommend that you read the full Sermon on the Mount. This is the only sermon that Jesus or Yeshua, whatever you call him, like, this is the only sermon that we have recorded of his, like in terms of like full sermon. It's the red letters, right? So very, very powerful here. I'm going to start in verse 25. So this is verse 25. Therefore, I tell you, Jesus says, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? Consider the birds of the sky. They don't sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they? Can any one of you add one moment to his lifespan by worrying? And why worry, or why do you worry about clothes? Observe how the wildflowers of the field grow. They don't labor or spin thread. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was adorned like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the furnace tomorrow, won't he do so much more for you, you of little faith? So don't worry saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear? Before I get into verse 32, so that passage about, God dressing the fields, with flowers, that you can pull that from the song that I had you listen to today, like if he dresses the lilies, which I think is so beautiful. It really probably is one of my top 5, maybe even top 2 favorite worship songs of all time. So I just wanted to point that out. But now this is verse 32. For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. So I want to talk about this Gentile moment that he's giving us for a second. It's like a Gentile moment here. We've talked about this before when we were in Matthew, but Matthew was written to the Jews. So the way that Matthew posits, or the way that Matthew really communicates, is he's communicating to people who understand Jewish context, who understand Jewish history, who understand, the Jewish, I would say, life, right? So when he mentions the Gentiles, they would understand, oh, the Gentiles are out here worrying about these things. And here's what he's referring to here. So the Gentiles were people who were not a part of, obviously, Jewish culture, but because they are separate from this Abrahamic covenant. We've talked about the covenants before, right? So God gives Abraham a covenant. This is back in Genesis, and the Gentiles were outside of Abraham's lineage. They are outside of Abraham's lineage. We are outside. Me, you, we are considered Gentiles. We are outside of Abraham's lineage. Now, when Jesus is saying this, he had not bridged the gap between Gentile and Jew at the time. So he's really speaking to Jewish people, saying, the Gentiles are over there and we're over here. That's, they are outside of the Hebraic group of people. Just as a reminder, the Abrahamic covenant was threefold. It was, just to sum it up, it was God's promise to increase, right? It was to increase land, it was to increase descendants, and it was to increase blessing to Abraham and his family. These blessings, right, extend to Abraham's lineage, to his seed, what the Bible calls it, and that is the Abrahamic covenant. And so I want you to see what Jesus is kind of saying here, because to the Jewish people, this is very significant. Jesus says, I can see how someone who doesn't fall under the umbrella of the promise would be worried about all these things. Because remember, the Jew over here, they are under the umbrella of the covenant. They are under the protection and under the promise of increase. God's I will increase you. I will increase your land. I will increase your descendants. I will increase your blessings, right? Blessings. We've talked about this in one of the previous Bible studies. Blessing is usually synonymous with wealth. And God promised an increase to the Abrahamic covenant, or to the people of Abraham under the Abrahamic covenant. So Jesus says, I can see how people who are not under the umbrella of that covenant would be worried about these things, right? Because they don't get those promises. But not you. You don't need to be worried about these things. As a matter of fact, you are supposed to be holy. You're supposed to be set apart. That. The word holy, that's exactly what it means. It means, it comes from the Hebrew word kadesh, or kadesh, depending on how you find that word in the text. And Exodus 19 is when God says, you are a holy nation. You are set apart. And it literally means to be set apart for a reason. I'm setting you apart because I have a purpose for you. That's the very definition of holy. So it's almost well, this is my toothbrush. This is a holy toothbrush set apart for me. This is, a holy notepad set apart for me. I write specific things on this notebook. So by definition, that's kind of what holy means. So I need for us to kind of recognize when Jesus is saying that, what it means. Now, I also want to just give you a little bit of of assurance here, that when Jesus is saying this, like I said before, he was able to bridge the gap. So the Messianic Covenant, depending on what your theology says, my theology and the study of the covenants, the Messianic Covenant is, it like overtakes the Abrahamic Covenant, so to speak. Like the Abrahamic Covenant is still in effect, like they'll still get those things, but now, we get to be grafted in because of Jesus's work and what he was able to do for us. So don't worry, if you are not Jewish, it's not that you are not under the Abrahamic Covenant, you are now under the Messianic Covenant, which puts us into the fold and puts us into the family. So we are not the redheaded stepchildren, but we are actually adopted and grafted in. And I think that that's very important to note. Okay, so verse 32, "For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided for you. Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own." So I need hold on, it's dark. Okay, let's lighten it up. Okay, so I need for you to, for a moment, think about what causes the worry in your life. And I'm going to talk about it, obviously, from the point of an entrepreneur, from the perspective of money, making money as an entrepreneur, because in our world, entrepreneurship seems so risky, right? It is very much a you eat what you kill kind of career choice, even though I don't actually believe that to be true. I think entrepreneurs really and truly have contributed significantly to society, and without entrepreneurship and innovation, we wouldn't have the country that we live in to this day. So I don't believe that, but I think a lot of people do, and I think people come into entrepreneurship thinking that it's so risky because the money that you're only allowed to make this amount of money. And if you don't make money, like, God, what else is going to happen? But this is also why I talk through what it looks like to have that energetic support. Like, this is my energetic minimum. This is my energetic maximum. And to really trust in what that looks like for you, because as you raise your energetic minimums and maximums, money flows freely, money flows easily in those spaces. But the work of maintaining the frequency is that's the work that we do. It's not even so much like the hustle and the grind and the let me do this and let me do that. It's the internal work around building up our mental resilience. It's the internal work around our belief systems that cause us to be led to the right actions that become profitable. And that's why I want to talk about worry, because worry is one of those things that negates all of that. Like because it colonizes so much space and energy, it takes away any opportunity that we have to get creative, to show up differently, to seek and recognize opportunity when it comes, right? Worry causes us to procrastinate. And there's a quote by Bishop Rosie O'Neill, and she says, procrastination is the arrogant assumption that God will create an opportunity tomorrow for what he called you to do today. And I remember hearing that and going, well, by golly, right? Procrastination is the arrogant assumption that God will create an opportunity tomorrow for what he has called you to do today. Because the way that God operates is in cycles and in seasons and in rhythms and in windows and in openings of opportunity. Stephen Furtick has this sermon called Work Your Window. Like, God gives you this window. He says, work your window. So that's what I think about when I think about the window. But there are periods of time where God is very clear when he is calling you to do something, right? There are periods of time when God is like, no, this is what I need you to do. Like, or God speaks to you, or God affirms something in you, or he plants a seed of vision in you. And it's louder than any other time. And I know for those of you who've experienced this, you know that this is true. Like, I don't have to convince you of times where God has been very, very clear with you. I think sometimes God is a little bit, I don't want to say silent. I think God is always speaking, but there are times where God is definitely louder than others, right? It's like this burst of inspiration, and it's provoking you into doing something. It like gets you so excited. You're out of your chair. You're ready to rock and roll. Like, it provokes you to move forward, right? And he does it at precisely the right time. And he does it in precisely the right season. Now, when I say the right time and the right season, it is the right time and season for him. It may not feel like it is the right time and season for you. And recognize that. Like, most of the time it is inconvenient. Most of the time it is uncomfortable. Most of the time it will be an interruption, especially if you are called to really big things. And God knows that. Like he knows that it is not comfortable for you. He knows that it's inconvenient. He knows that it's an interruption to what you were doing over here or what you thought your life would look like, right? He's not surprised though by any of those things. And I always say this to people. I'm like, God is not surprised by what's going on right now. Like he's not surprised that on your way to the airport, the tire blew out. Like God's not surprised by these things. And God has already prepared the solution to the problems that are arising. Sometimes we just cling to the problem a little bit too long, right? But he's not surprised that the thing he's calling you to do today requires you to have greater faith than you did yesterday, or requires for you to exercise greater amounts of trust. Like that's not actually a surprise for him. He is not shocked at the crisis of faith that you're experiencing in this moment as you try to wrap your mind around the grandeur of God's calling for your life. And this is a great comfort to me, because when I feel like God is calling me to do something and I am just fighting tooth and nail, like I don't want to do this does not sound like fun to me, this is annoying, I don't want to do it right now, like I know that God is probably up there going, I know that you don't want to do it, but this is good for you. It's like, eat your vegetables. I know that you don't like those Brussels sprouts, little Tracy. Eat the Brussels. Now I like Brussels sprouts, but when you're talking to like a little kid and the kid doesn't want to eat their peas and you're like, eat your peas, it's fiber, right? Like this is good for you. And sometimes I think that God is up there doing that. But the point is that God knows what you're feeling. God gets that. And he's already planned for that. So when God gives you a desire, right, this seed of a vision, when he gives you that seed, and then that seed, like oftentimes that seed will get confirmed like in your spirit, like over and over again, right? And you tell people, or people tell you before you even tell people. And so they're already affirming it to you before it ever even comes out of your mouth. Or like you see an Instagram ad, or you see a book title, or you see a billboard, I don't care, on the side of a bus, I don't know, your great aunt calls you and says, I had a dream about you, right? Whatever the case is, but like other people are starting to affirm it. It's almost like God is like prepping you, and so he's like pre-encouraging you. He's like, listen, I know that you're going to need this encouragement. So let me, before you even ask for it, before you even ask for any kind of confirmation or affirmation, let me go ahead and give you that right now. Let me front load the encouragement wagon in your favor so that you know that I'm serious, right? And it's like this fire in your belly, and it keeps you up at night, and it's like you make every attempt to distract yourself from it, but you couldn't run away even if you tried. It like haunts you. It comes back over and over again. That's because God is not playing with you. He is not playing with your calling. He is not playing with you when he's calling you to do something. Right? So I wanted to share a snippet of the September Bible study that I just released, because I think it's really relevant to what a lot of people are experiencing right now when it comes to envisioning the future. Like there's so much, and you feel very called into a space, but you also are plagued by the web of worry that comes with being called to great things. I know exactly what you feel. I've been there. I know that sometimes when you are being called to bigger and better, you're concerned because you don't see the entire path before you. And so that was really just an encouragement to be like, hey, I know that you don't see that path, but God does, and he's already planned for it. And you don't have to rest in the worry when you can rest in your source. And so hopefully that encouraged some of you today. If you're still thinking through whether or not platform is for you and you're going back and forth with it, what I don't want you to do is make a decision from that place of worry, right? Like let faith finish what it started. If faith brought you to a place where you are believing in the possibilities of what God can do, then let God finish out the faith. Let God show up in the faith. Like let God move you through the places of worry and fear while you're clinging to the faith. One of the things that I mentioned in the Bible study that I didn't include in the snippet was you can't really be in two places. Like doubt will separate you from your calling, because that's the very definition of what doubt does in the Greek. This is doubt over here, and doubt is coming to like pummel you, and it separates you from God's purpose in your life because it uses the fear that you're experiencing, or the worry or the doubt, as a division. And that's the last thing that I want any of you to experience. So I'm here if anybody has any questions about it. But if you are experiencing worry, then hopefully this encouraged you a little bit, and hopefully it spurs you into further and trusting in the right thing, and not necessarily trusting in the worry and the